Today's specialist knows what's wrong with our global financial markets, and for that matter, why we don't see the innovation and prosperity and job creation we ought to see. We don't have a functioning capital market. We don't have a financial system that's pushing money into the system. In fact, we've been taken over by what he calls zombie banks, those that feed off of an endless supply of invented money in our central banks. Think, yes, Night of the Living Dead if they were banksters. These specially privileged, uniquely endowed zombie banks not only are dead broke, they owe more than they have, and they are demanding that we continue to feed their $700 trillion secretly run credit insurance casino. All of this prevents us from having investment in our own country, and the disease is now spread to other countries. Just one example being, of course, Greece, which is drowning in debt. The crisis so bad, so much leverage, it threatens to take down the entire Eurozone. Germany, France, how could this be? The economy in Greece is smaller than Dallas-Fort Worth. It's a joke. Joining us now, a man with a plan, Yalman Onaran, is financial reporter for Bloomberg News. And the zombie banks are here. So listen, you're on a set, obviously, which is not going to give you a lot of pushback as to whether the big banks are helping us. The more interesting question, I think, in this context is, what do you recommend? What is the greatest symptom of the screwed up banking system on the street? Is it the joblessness? What is it? And how do we address it?
It is the joblessness, one of them, but there are many other problems that they cause. And we have zombie banks in history. We had them in Japan. We had them in the U.S. in the 80s. And until we dealt with them, they really... And by the time we dealt with them...
The problem is they suck all the money.
They suck money. And when we finally address the issue, the taxpayer ends up paying double, 3 times, 4 times more. So we end up with the bill always, and we pay more. But meanwhile... Because this is so global, it's European banks, it's U.S. banks, and the world economy is caught in a spiral which it can't get out of. I mean, we're talking about, They
can get out of it. You can get out of it. You just got to cancel the debt. Exactly. The mathematical opposite of printing money is canceling debt. If I can invent money out of thin air, I can certainly delete a few zeros on the way out.
We need serious debt restructuring, and in the U.S. and in Europe. In Europe, it's the sovereign nations that can't pay that needs to be restructured. In the U.S., we have mortgage debt that needs to be restructured, but we can't do those because we have these zombie banks. They are so weak that if we did the restructuring, they would fall apart. They would collapse.
So, Yalman, I mean, if I take the premise that we have zombie banks, and we certainly do have lots of them. I'm not sure that we have as many in the U.S. as we had 2 years ago. We've got them in Europe. Japan is the perfect example.
You can't even tell sometimes.
You can't tell. Well, that's the thing. But is the alternative to allow these banks to fail? I mean, obviously, it is the alternative is to allow them to fail. The policy decision is that obviously that there would be too much pain in letting banks fail. And it would be far greater than allowing a few zombie banks go along.
The reason they're always kept alive is the contagion fear that when you let one fail, like it happened in the case of Lehman, there were so many other problems, the credit crunch, etc. But especially now, we have in the U.S. and in Europe, they do too, systems where we can deal with these banks. We can seize them, shut them down. We have certain resolution authorities.
There's a containment apparatus.
And even before, and I don't even, before Dodd-Frank, there were always ways to really take over and do something. We've done them a million times. I mean, too big to fail, and we can't. There are no legal ways to do it. I never buy that. There are always ways for the governments to really seize those banks, shut them down.
They control the bank charter.
And control
the bank's charter.
Sell the good stuff and get rid of the bad stuff over time without hurting the rest of the financial system.
So speaking of Dodd-Frank, if you go back to that time, if you could have any bill that you wanted, do anything that you could do, I mean, what would you have put in it? And the legislators that were involved claim that now there is no too big to fail, that they have a resolution path, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, what is your assessment of that? How good of a job did they do?
My biggest contention with Dodd-Frank is it's way too long, way too complicated. The bill is almost 2,000 pages, but the rules that the regulators are trying to write to comply are thousands and thousands of pages. And you cannot really implement such complicated rules. It never works. It's too complicated.
You need one rule.
You need
capital requirements.
Exactly. Very simple couple of rules. I have two. Okay. One, we could bring Glass-Steagall, which separated investment banking from commercial banking. Two, we could have strict limits on how big banks can get. Studies that I include in my book that I looked at while I was researching say that beyond $100 billion of assets, there is no economies of scale for banking. So why are they so large? We don't really need them to be. They don't really add anything to the financial system to innovation.
It's the same question as to why would you allow the swaps market, the credit insurance market, to exist in a private market when every other security on the earth is traded on an exchange, with the exception maybe of some weird gold market somewhere in the Middle East. Anyway, go ahead, Ari.
How did your sources react to the book?
Most of them are not shocked about the findings. My banking friends, some of them said disagree with certain parts of it. But overall, I don't think there's anyone that realizes we really have not fixed the banking issue.
And
the problem
it's got to
in the
mean
world.
something when Mike Mayo, who was really. Certainly, when I was a financial reporter at Bloomberg, whatever it was, I guess 10 years ago, maybe the most influential banking analyst on Wall Street, would you not say? Certainly one of two or three of them. One of the smartest, most respected. I mean, Mike Mayo really was a gold standard for the narrative on the financial industry. And when Mike Mayo comes out with a book, which he has, which has a similar narrative to what you have in Zombie Banks, has a similar narrative to what's in Greedy Bastards, and all these books that are addressing this, it has to mean something. Am I wrong to perceive that Mike Mayo? I look at Mike Mayo like a member of the family. Like, we're like neighbors. We're like, I think they're beating their children. Mike Mayo's like, they're my parents, and this is crazy.
No, it's true, and there are several bank analysts quoted in my book that really highlight these same issues too. I mean, one of them says the too big to fail banks, they're just too big to manage. They're too complicated. How can you really deal with a $2 trillion, and that's just the balance sheet, you add another trillion off balance sheet, $3 trillion. How do you deal with that?
Right.
How do you run that?
And then how do you do it also when you can't even see where the risk is?
Right.
I can't walk into a room and no one can brief me as to what the risk is. The CEO doesn't know what the risk is.
Right.
The board of directors doesn't know what the risk is.
Right.
Other CEOs have no idea what the risk is. I have no idea what your risk is because the whole thing's being run in a black hole with this. Anyway, this is wonderful, and I think that the conversation certainly has come a long way in the past few years, and hopefully that'll be the beginning of actually being able to resolve the banks in some fashion over the next 5 years without feeling the need to destroy or attack or anything. You just need to fix it. Nice to see you guys.
You too,
All right,
Dylan.
thank you very much. Have a good weekend.
Thanks.
Thanks for the toy. Congrats on the book.